Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first Agenda IDS of the year. I'm Patricia Porto, the Academic Coordinator of Dannemann Siemsen Institute. Agenda IDS is an online event in which we address important topics regarding intellectual property, law, and technology. I always invite experts on the subject to share their experience with us. And those who miss the live event will be able to access the record content available later on Dannemann Siemsen Institute website. And today, we will debate about the growing influence of dupes industry, such as cosmetic, fashions, and consumer goods, as well as the impact on IP right holders. And to discuss this topic today, we invite two experts on the matter. And please, let me introduce our guests. Today with us, we have Alastair Gray. Welcome, Alastair. Alastair is the International Trademark Association Director of Anti-Counterfeiting and is the staff liaison of over 340 volunteers of the IDS Anti-Counterfeiting Committee, which develops the association policies and positions on combat trademarking counterfeiting worldwide. Alastair is also currently signed as an expert in the Lipkus Observatory Expert Groups on cooperation with intermediaries, which studies, among other subjects, infringement in social media. We also welcome David Lipkus. Welcome, David. David is a lawyer and founder of Lipkus Law LLP in Canada. David has dedicated his practice to stop infringers from using or reproducing his clients' intellectual property without permission in Canada and online. David's principal focus is on intellectual property brand protection for trademarks, copyrights, and industrial designs. And to moderate the event, we invite Rafaela Borges Walter Carneiro. Welcome, Rafaela. Rafaela is a lawyer and partner at Dannemann Siemsen. She holds an LLM in intellectual property law from Philipps Universität Marburg in Germany. She works at all levels of trademark protection process, and her expertise includes the strategic management of national and international portfolios. And I would like to thank very much our guests and the audience for being here today with us today. And now I will give the floor to Rafaela. Please, Rafaela.
So hi, guys. Good morning. I will be short. So it's a pleasure to moderate this panel, having David and Alastair with us. We'll talk a lot about dupes. Dupes is a short for duplicates, and there is a lot of discussion on how dupes is going to be treated as an infringement or not. The thing is that the dupe market has exploded in popularity, mainly with the influencers. And on platforms like TikTok or YouTube, the hashtag dupe has surpassed 4 billion views, showing how these products are really capturing the attention of consumers, especially the younger generations. So there is an excellent chance to have David and Alastair here to go ahead and think and propose this discussion with us. So I will start our conversation asking a question to David. And David, how did the dupe culture begin? And what do you think is the impact on social media?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. I just want to start, and I obviously think Alastair will agree with me. We want to thank you very much for asking us to talk, and we're really excited to provide our 2 cents on dupe culture. Well, just to begin, and I'm going to tell a really quick story about myself, but I started practicing as a lawyer in 2009, and I was very active on social media because I use social media in my personal life. And when I became a lawyer on the, what I'll call counterfeit, infringement, intellectual property side, there were issues that brands were having at the time. And the biggest issue that was facing from an infringement perspective that brands were facing was MySpace. And just to put in perspective, the start of dupe culture is as a result of the popularity of social media. And if we go back to the 2009, 2010 era, let's think about what social media was all about. Social media was a way for individuals to interact. Historically, there was messaging, there was email, but what social media did is it drove the ability for pictures and then videos, and it was a more fun format for people to really come together and talk with each other and talk about like-minded subjects and really just be together as a society. Didn't matter if I was in Brazil or Canada or in the US or in the Netherlands, we could all talk at the same time together live. So let's think about what the world was like back then. What ended up happening is you had really popular people. And let's think about the grand scope of social media at the time. And believe me, this will lead into dupe culture. There's Ronaldo, over 1 billion followers collectively with all his social media. Taylor Swift, Selena Gomez, Justin Bieber. There were really popular people that many people around the world wanted to follow. So what happened was brands decided I can leverage the popularity of that star. And what they started doing was advertising naturally and organically through these really popular stars. For example, if Ronaldo put, a bottle of Coca-Cola, or pick any brand, if they would market that brand on their social media, it had vast reach. And it was never seen before. It used to be billboards and television advertisements, but social media changed the game. And what happened was you would have these massive followers that brands accepted and wanted to market through. And then everyone went onto social media, right? You think fast forward to today, everyone's there. What ended up happening is you had a whole market of influencers. And it wasn't just the big stars. You could have an account with 1,000 followers, and that could be very valuable to a brand because what they would market on their channel, on their social media platform, spoke from a consumer perspective to the followers. So those followers would want to buy whatever was being advertised by that influencer, whether it was a big influencer like a Ronaldo that we think of, the biggest arguably, or a small micro influencer which had limited following. So what ended up happening is that the brands accepted this form of communication. And what flowed from that is not only would brands, by way of example, market, then you would have counterfeit sellers market. And when you had the brands there and the counterfeiters there, what ended up happening, fast forward to today, is you would then have the duplicate sellers as well, which is arguably in between, and we'll talk a little bit about where they fit within it. But you would have the duplicate sellers, you would have them market through the use of social media to the different consumers. And at the end of the day, what is this all about? It's about consumer behavior. And that to me is how this all started, was the power of the what I'll call micro influencers in marketing to consumers, because whatever they say you should buy, the consumers would follow.
Perfect. So Alastair, in your experience, do you think that consumers, they actively seek dupes as a budget-friendly alternative, or do they simply want a product with similar performance? First question. Do you see that there is a generational division in the attitudes towards dupes? That is, with younger consumers being more accepting than the older luxury buyers?
Great question. And again, thank you so much for having me here as well. And again, like David, and I realize we are wearing a matching uniform, so we're almost like dupes of each other. Two sides of the coin. But yeah, I want to also start with a story actually, and it goes back to, I think we must have started our careers at roughly the same time, and it was in the late 2000s. I was an investigator at that time, so I would be going out into stores and buying products and that kind of thing, and in the UK, and it was probably more famous than that as well. There was a really popular boot that just kind of exploded on the market. It was probably driven by kind of reality TV shows where you would have, like David said, these are kind of, at that time, micro influencers, or what became influencers at that point, and where everyone wanted to get hold of these products, no matter what it was. And I think I did this one investigation and I went around the city of Birmingham in the UK and I was buying up these boots as a guy just walking around, walking around like 20 versions of this same boot. But that was the kind of start of the dupe, culture really. And I think they all had like slight variations, but they were basically doing the same thing, trying to replicate that same brand product. And I had to kind of get that train home with like a duffel bag full of with the boots. But I think what that showed, and the stores that I was going into was this kind of budget friendly alternatives that people were thinking that they would be able to get this cheaper version of what everyone wanted. And I think if you look at what's happened today is, I mean, even go back a couple of years, like PwC did a study, they found like almost 70% of people were holding back on essential spending across like 25 jurisdictions. So I think we're still living through those times where not so many people have that purchasing power anymore. And I think dupes do seem to offer that way for consumers to kind of enjoy the product, enjoy the products that they think without the price tag of the original one. And obviously dupe implies that kind of mimicry and the appearance, the function of the original, but claiming the similar performance at a lower cost. But I think one thing that we had from our podcast, the Brand New podcast, we had Cassandra Bankson, who's like a huge influencer around kind of dupes and dupe cosmetics. And she said, well, dupes provide a solution to a problem. And I think that's for consumers. And again, David says, this is kind of the lens we need to look at this through, is the consumer approach to it. Because we're in that kind of globalization, everything, people want things kind of now and then. And again, going back to my fashion days, we always kind of looked at things that kind of, you have the innovators who are the ones going out and daring to be different and trying those new things. Then you'd have the kind of early adopters. And I think the world we're in now is everyone wants to be the early adopter, or they can be, because you can go online and you can pretty much find any product you want. So I think that's where we're kind of getting to as well. I think it's the approach to products has really changed as well. I think going towards the kind of generational divide, I think that's, when you look at the kind of the dupes that are on social media, it's often perfumes, cosmetics, clothing, accessories, which isn't that surprising given that like huge numbers of people are now buying via live streaming and that kind of thing as well. And I think in some ways, it might seem like a Gen Z thing approach or and millennial approach, but I think actually it's kind of broken it down. I think like I said, anyone can go and get these products. So no, it's just generally how popular is that product and how explosive has it been that makes people want it. And I think that's going to be the key, really. The way we look at it in the future, it's not just picking out like this one consumer group that we need to kind of educate or target. It's kind of everyone. And how do we do that?
Great, thank you.
And just to add in really quickly, if you triggered my memory, Alastair, do you remember back in the day when you would buy perfume or fragrances and it would say smells like, right? So that was like, it's not like dupes is a new thing that has never been around, right? There's always been, from a consumer purchasing behavior, a cheaper alternative that a brand or a seller is trying to sell to a consumer. So it's not new. But the reality is, and I think, Alastair, you'll agree, it's now hitting every single industry, and any single brand or item that becomes popular, you now have a whole culture of this other brands trying to create dupes. And so that's what makes it really fun to talk about today, in the sense that it's a real live issue for every big brand that exists.
So going back to you, how does the IP law differentiate between inspiration, imitation, and infringement in the context of dupes? I think that's maybe the most difficult question.
The million dollar question, Rafaela. I like it. Thank you. So a couple things. Number one, which is important for me to say, the laws are different in different countries. So you have to be mindful. If you're going to look at this from a global issue, which we are today, you must recognize that the law in Canada as it relates, for example, to brand dilution or trademark infringement or counterfeit is different from the US, which is different from Brazil, which is different from the Netherlands, which is really different depending on the globe. And then you add in that we're dealing with an online issue, and it just complicates things. Having said that, what I want to do is look at this from the perspective of a pendulum swinging, and where does it go from inspiration to infringement, or is it even a counterfeit versus a dupe? And for me, I like to talk from personal experience. So when it comes to inspiration, my favorite designer is the late Virgil Abloh. And for those that aren't familiar, go Google him. To me, he's the best designer, the coolest from my generation, my vintage. And I'm going to tell a story from when he was fashion director at Louis Vuitton, but he came out with the fashion runway, and he stitched these animal designs onto products. And I recall at the time that people were really upset. There were these plush figures on designs, and this artist, Van Bierendonck, came out and said, "Why didn't you collaborate with me? That is my design, and you stole from me." And Virgil Abloh publicly came out and said, "I may be inspired by lots of other designers, but rest assured, everything I look at every day, architecture or different artists, everything in the world inspires me to create what I've created." And so it's really important to think about it from that perspective, that if as an artist, you're being inspired, that's different from copying. And I'm not, my lens and my bias is on behalf of the brands, right? I represent rights owners, so I'm never going to represent an infringer. I'm always going to be on the rights owner side. So having said that, people take inspiration from other things. That still requires, in this context, that they're creating something anew, right? Are they copying or are they creating? And if you look at that story about Virgil Abloh, which you can Google it, to learn more about it. But the key is, are you reproducing? Are you deceiving? So just something to think about from the inspiration perspective, which the artist in me, or in all of us, would say we get inspired from everything around the world. Then you go into imitation. And imitation, which if you look at the definition, imitation is obviously an attempt to copy, right? Where you're not trying to be inspired and to create something new, you're arguably trying to deceive. And I think it's important to think about this in the context of a trademark, because trademark, no matter what country you're in, is all about likelihood of consumer confusion, right? How is the product resembling the other product? And we'll dissect that momentarily. But if there's an imitation where you're, to me, attempting to deceive, offside. That's where you're moving out of the world of being inspired and into the world of imitation, or arguably, said another way, infringement. And to me, this is the fun lawyer part about dupe culture. Is the product infringing? And you must, as counsel, for the brands that are on the call and for the lawyers that are on the call, what do we enjoy doing? We enjoy breaking it down legally. So you've got a trademark, right? So number one, is it a slogan? Is it a word? Does the dupe use the brand elements associated with the imitation copy? So if you think about, for example, dupe culture today, the brand elements from a trademark perspective are being stripped. They're not using the brand name. They're certainly not using the slogan. It'll be a generic version of the brand's good. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means. Then you have to think about it from the copyright perspective, right? Is it an artistic work that is being infringed? And that's different from trademark, right? Trademark is likelihood of consumer confusion. Think of when you think of a copyright, you can think of an artistic work, certainly something easy as a film or video or music or a sculpture, for example. That's where you get into the world of artistic works. And from a legal perspective, words matter. It's from a copyright perspective, is the work being reproduced, Whereas if you think of trademark, you think is the good being used, right? Is the trademark being used from an infringement perspective? Then you go into copyright. And from there, you then get into the even more fun things. So in Canada, for example, there's industrial designs, which is similar to trade dress in the United States. In Canada, there's believe it or not, trademark 3D protection for trademarks, which you have in lots of other jurisdictions as well. So a 3D trademark, or think of a design, not the utilitarian function, but think about the actual item that's being reproduced or being copied or being used. Is that design being infringed? And a lot of the dupes today fall into the world of copyright infringement or fall into the world of 3D design infringement from a trademark perspective and brand dilution. Canada has a really interesting area of law. It's called depreciation of the value of goodwill. And a lot of the dupes today arguably dilute the brand and depreciate the value of the brand. And that's really, from a lawyer's perspective, the fun part of trying to attack dupe culture. So to me, from the perspective of the dupe, those are the really fun areas of intellectual property law that we get to analyze. Again, on a case-by-case basis. You can't look at it. There's no one set answer for every dupe that's out there. Lawyers get paid because we have to analyze each one individually to see on that pendulum swinging, where is it? Inspiration or in a lot of cases, infringement.
Thank you. Alastair, do you believe that consumers, they understand the difference between dupes and a counterfeit, or there is a gray area in between?
I think it's a really good question again. And I think like picking up on what David said, I mean, from the comments that I read online on kind of Instagram, TikTok and Reddit, I think there is a kind of gray area. I mean, dupes obviously aiming to, like David said, it's kind of what elements are being borrowed and in terms of the brand and that kind of thing as well. But I think one of the gray areas is when dupes resemble that original product so closely that consumers just mistake them or either for counterfeits or even, the other kind of way around, or the counterfeiters are even borrowing elements of the dupe to try and get around, platform protection or brand owners as well, because they'll basically, what I used to see as well in terms of the way that they would approach it in terms of e-commerce, counterfeiters will strip out everything to do with the brand now as well. And then you can kind of do the checkout, but then you actually get the counterfeit in the end as well. So there is this kind of increasing kind of complexity there. And people do use terms like reps, replica, dupes, or dupes spelt differently as well. Like it gets these kind of more cute kind of ways of approaching it. David mentioned kind of inspired by, which is a classic kind of way that especially kind of cosmetics and perfumes are kind of used. And I think this interchangeability with dupes and counterfeits as well is happening a lot more. So people don't even distinguish between them. Like a dupe can be a counterfeit or it can be, a copy type product of a product, the way that David's kind of explained it. And I think this is kind of breaking down a lot of the barriers as well, in terms of the way people think about intellectual property. Because the more that as brand protection professionals, we've kind of taken on infringers, we've pushed them further and further into kind of hidden link schemes or private access websites and closed forums and that kind of thing. And I think that's made the gray area kind of even more. You have pushing people, one, if they're intentionally about buying counterfeits, to go down that route. But I think actually we might start seeing it for other things as well. Like when people really want to get this style, either it's going to be completely out in the open and then it might get taken down, or they'll start going down these kind of rabbit holes of where to find the product. And I think video content as well has really become breeding grounds for letting information grow and explode as well. And I think with dupes are the same. You kind of have these echo chambers of, like I said, people aren't necessarily making that distinction anymore, which I think is really challenging for many brands as well. And I think one other thing to kind of pick up on, though it wasn't particularly to do with dupes in general, but INTA did a study which was back in 2019 around kind of Gen Z and counterfeit, and kind of looked at their attitudes and perception as well. And I think what we found was that at that time, basically price will always trump morals. And I think that's one of the things when you get into like the ethical questions around dupes as well, and how that's going to kind of play out when people are making these decisions. And actually, like at that point, I think 79% of Gen Zers had purchased fake products, which means they're already kind of open to choosing a copy or choosing a counterfeit. And I think dupe kind of opens that Pandora's box even more, or opens the door to where is the moral gray area about this, when it's products that are taking other people's designs and everything else and just copying them, and you kind of lose the IP and the creativity behind it. So I think it's a challenging one, and I think we're yet to see the end of it, I think, in terms of how this is going to develop and really influence kind of counterfeit purchasing behaviors in the future.
So moving a little bit now to the anti-counterfeiting area or perspective. David, do you think, what's the legal distinction between a dupe and a counterfeit from this anti-counterfeiting perspective?
Okay, I appreciate the question. What I want to do is look at this from the perspective of a consumer.
Okay.
And I'm a consumer, and for those that don't know me on the call, I own a lot of pairs of shoes, and I own more shoes than my wife and 2 kids combined, and I'm proud of that. So I want to look at this from the perspective of a fan of shoes. And so what I'm going to do right now is do a quick screen share, and I'm going to pull up an image of a pair of shoes. And this is, we can look at this from the perspective of really any pair of shoes. So if you think, for example, of Nike, think of, Air Force Ones or the Jordan 1 silhouette. Right now on the screen is the Yeezy Boost, which is an Adidas pair of shoes, no longer sold anymore. So interesting timing that that I'm using this example. If you think of Puma, you can obviously think of the Speed Cat, but whatever brand you have, there are certain silhouettes, there are certain shoes that are being sold in the marketplace that are synonymous with that brand. And that's important because it's not just for example, the 3 stripes or the leaping cat for Puma or the swoosh for Nike. What I want to do now is remove the trademark layer and look at this from the perspective of the copyright. And right now on the screen is an image of a letter that was written by the Copyright Office to Adidas granting copyright protection for the Yeezy Boost as an artistic work. And there's a couple really important snippets. What I'll do in the chat, if you don't want to look at the screen, I'm just putting up the letter, which I think everyone should read because it really assists in thinking about dupe culture and how to enforce from a counterfeiting perspective or from an infringement perspective. And so if we go back to the screen, the Yeezy Boost is, yes, a shoe has a utilitarian function, and the copyright does not want to protect, obviously, the function associated with the shoe. What the Copyright Office wants to protect, in this case, it was the US, is the artistic elements. And there's no question when this shoe was designed, it was a work of art. It had never been before seen in this way. And it's not, for example, just the sole, either the midsole or the heel. It's really the work as a whole. And so why is this important? Because in today's culture, what ends up happening is you have infringers come along and they try and mimic or imitate or are inspired by, they try and create a shoe that looks just like this shoe. They use the same type of art. And I don't care what brand's perspective you want to look at it from, but once a work is considered a copyright, is registrable as a copyright, then what flows from that? If the work has been reproduced in some format, it substantially reproduces the law in Canada. If it's been substantially reproduced, then it's arguably being infringed. And in Canada, counterfeit's not defined in any act. So if it's arguably being infringed, then in Canada, you can go to court and make the argument that it's a counterfeit copy. And so that's the fun part of assessing each individual item on its own. And if you take a look, I'm just going to scroll up really quickly, you'll see what the copyright actually says. Number 1, copyright does not provide useful articles as such. That's important from the US language. But historically, you wouldn't think about obtaining copyright protection for a pair of shoes. What was brilliant that was done by this brand, I had no involvement, just to be clear. And a quick shout out to Kenneth Anand. You can Google him. He's the author of Sneaker Law, and he's become you know, a big inspiration to me. And it was him at the time. He was working with Yeezy, and obviously Adidas was working together, partnering with them. But this brilliance in obtaining copyright protection for this work is allowing, in my respectful opinion, is allowing the rights owners to assess infringement from the perspective of the dupe. And to me, the brilliant dupes strip the potentially the trademarks, not the 3D trademarks, but strip the traditional word, slogan, trademarks associated with these goods. But you can still assess it from the perspective of copyright. And if you're lucky enough to obtain a 3D registration or a design patent or industrial design in Canada, then you have additional tools to actually enforce. To answer your question, and just to quickly sum up, at the end of the day, from an anti-counterfeiting, purely anti-counterfeiting perspective, there must, to me, be infringement of a registered right. You know, can you assess from a common law perspective that the item is counterfeit because the mark is not yet registered? Yes, but it's a much more challenging case as a lawyer to bring forward. And it's not to say that there won't be opportunities to do so. Having said that, if you obtain the registered right and there's an item that is being reproduced or using the registered trademark elements, move into the world of counterfeiting. Now, I have clients in, for example, in the clothing and apparel space. Let's move away from shoes and let's move into the clothing and apparel space. And there are third-party marketplaces that are selling dupes, you know, in today's world, DOOP, because they don't want to get caught within the world of the dupe hashtag, right? So that to me is moving into the world of infringement, where they're trying to evade detection, evade enforcement, and they're using the brand to sell what I'll refer to as the low quality version. The IP lawyer in me gets scared for a number of reasons. Number one, and I'm going to use, for example, track pants and sweatshirts, and there are lots of different dupe versions of these branded goods. The quality of the garments are horrible. If the consumers knew, for example, that the dupe item was being made in a factory by children who don't have the opportunity to go home and sleep at night and are chained to the sewing machines, I don't believe that consumers would want to purchase that dupe. I don't believe that the savings of money would provide the consumer with the incentive to still want to make that purchase. But the truth is, brands play by the rules of the specific country associated with manufacture. The dupe sellers don't. And they don't because they must have that cost savings, because the sole benefit that is being driven by the dupe seller is the margin of profit. And the danger to me is you're having these low quality items that are not the same level of quality as what the brand is selling, but are being marketed as such. And there's so much misinformation being provided today by the influencers who may say things like, it's made in the same factory as legitimate brand, which is a joke. And when I say it's a joke, I mean, there's no truth whatsoever to it. But unfortunately, in society, a lot of this information is to believe. And Alastair will laugh because what's the first thing a counterfeiter says when they get caught? Oh, we thought it came, it was the midnight shift run. It was the same factory. Well, no, right? The reason that the counterfeiter was caught is because there were mistakes in the labeling or in the quality of the garment. It's not the same. It's not a midnight factory run. It has nothing to do with that. But everyone on this call is sensitive to those issues. The majority of the consumers, absolutely not. So yes, counterfeiting is dangerous, but dupe culture is entering into the world of dangers similar to counterfeiting. And that's what scares me the most. There's a lot of education that needs to take place on the dupe side, which I'm happy for Alastair to share. And more importantly, the brand owners must enforce to the extent that they can, because their brands are being diluted, their goodwill is being damaged as a result of these dupes, and it's coming based on the popularity of the brand. It's coming to the detriment of the brand because of what the brand is doing, which is researching and innovating and creating high quality garments, high quality shoes, high quality apparel, high quality perfumes and fragrances. And the dupes and the counterfeiters generally are not. And obviously we could talk for hours of, to expand on a lot of this, but it's important to recognize that if a rights owner has a legitimate legal basis jurisdictionally to enforce, then absolutely protect that brand and enforce. And that's my obviously inherent bias to this issue.
Great, thank you so much. So Alastair, do you think that dupes, how do dupes affect the brand reputation, exclusivity, and the consumer trust?
I think David's just done a fantastic job in answering that. I think it really does come down to, I mean, it's exactly what he said. It's the dilution. And I think that's the challenge that brands have. And it is because you have that kind of halo product that goes out and everyone wants it. And then suddenly the market's completely flooded with similar, but not the same. And it means that, it completely erodes that exclusivity of that product. But it also, as David said, this isn't a quality thing. This is you're trying to get to the market as quickly as you can with the cheapest product as you can to be able to sell it. And that's the fundamental bottom line of that. And I think, it is that kind of worrying look at what is this knock-on effect going to be when brands have a dupe product coming through, because they've obviously done that research, the production, the advertising, secured the IP rights, which David mentioned as well. And consumers are turning away from that original because they're looking at it and thinking, well, it probably is, it could be the same, or like I'm going to just take this option because, as I mentioned before, it's for consumers, it can be the solution to a problem, the problem of exclusivity. And also like the desirability of that product. And I think, I guess the other side of it, coming from the brand experience side of things, where consumers do kind of have residual mistrust from bad experiences. Like if you do buy that counterfeit and you go to customer service and say, well, your product is rubbish, and then the customer service come around and say, well, that wasn't our product, they're still more likely to not buy your product again because they just have that bad experience. And I think it goes down to everything when we're talking around imitations of things. I mean, there's huge volumes of kind of spoof profiles of brands online. And I think that's another whole challenge that obviously we're not talking about today, but when people get scammed by someone imitating a brand, then again, that has a negative experience. Are they likely to trust that brand going forward? And so I think a lot of this is kind of wrapped up in that approach of thinking what is the impact on the consumer's vision of this? And I think it's slightly tangential, and David will be familiar with it as well. But one thing I worked on as well was the copycat brands. That there were a lot of these kind of exploding in different places in the world, where you would have companies that would register kind of very similar marks, but then they would transform them. So they would start adding new elements into the registered rights that they had to get as close as they could to the original brand. But then they would also copy all the product designs and the marketing materials. And this is like, I guess dupes on steroids, but not so much of a trademarking, as a counterfeit, because they weren't necessarily trying to be a counterfeit. They were just trying to imitate in that way. And that some brands have been really impacted by that, because you would suddenly have this kind of direct competitor looking more or less the same as you, springing up with stores and having sample sales and everything else. And I think brands also need to kind of continually be aware of that and understanding what will the consumer see when they're walking down the road and they see this other store that also looks the same. So, and going back to David as the guy protecting these rights, it's kind of having those registrations in place that you can actually protect your consumers at the end of the day, the ones that are out there looking for your brand.
Okay, I will continue with you because I think we have, Do you see, do you see dupes as a challenge to the luxury brands, an opportunity for innovation, both, or how do you see that?
I think, I mean, the challenge, as we've kind of talked about, is the erosion of market share. It's the dilution of the value of the luxury products. I think in many ways it can present an opportunity, one, to kind of tell your brand story. Again, going back to the podcast, which I recommend, I'll plug it again for Brand New. We had like a professional on there that was really talking around how brands need to tell the right story and what is your value proposition. And I think that's the opportunity to say, we're being imitated, but with us, you're getting the best value product. You're getting, the research, the design, the customer service in many cases. These aren't necessarily cheap products. And so I do think there is that kind of opportunity there. And I think looking at consumers, they're offering, do brands need to differentiate in terms of the product lines they have? Do they need to come closer to the consumers that want the dupes, but aren't buying the original products at the moment? So I think there are different avenues that brands can think about in terms of taking this forward. But I think they just need to be seen as in many ways, a competitor. It's a new competitor. It's hard to have new competitors, but hopefully that does drive innovation and being able to differentiate yourself in that market as well.
So, okay, let's move to the digital platforms. Dave, what role do platforms like Amazon, TikTok, Instagram play in the dissemination of dupes? And how can the brands enforce their rights in this digital marketplace?
Rafaela, just 1 minute to let our audience know that they can share the question with the lecturers in the chat.
Yeah, so if anyone has questions, you can write them on the chat. And so if we have the time, they will answer all of them, but if not, we'll pick some. But going back to David and the digital platforms.
Yes, so a couple things. Number one, that's your second $1 million question that you're asking me. This is what everyone wants to know. I will say that in 2025, looking at it from the perspective of how this is shaking out versus 10 plus years ago is different. And the reason I say that is because the volume of merchandise available, or the volume of dupe goods available on third-party marketplaces and social media, is incredibly high. And if you have a popular brand, then unfortunately that brand's being infringed, and the volume is massive, which means rights owners have no choice but to work together with platforms. And historically, when your enemy or the infringer is selling counterfeit, the thought would be litigate and be combative and find a solution through court or through some other acrimonious process. I believe as a result of e-commerce today and its power, there's no choice to do that anymore. Number one, it's very expensive. Most brands can't afford it. But more importantly, you're likely to achieve better results by working together with the platform. And rest assured that these platforms are the sellers of the infringing goods. And so, yes, you're working collaboratively, but, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. Just be mindful that the predominant business model of third-party marketplaces and social media is for content to remain live. And what the rights owners are doing is negatively, presumably impacting the business model of these intermediaries. So it's important when you get in bed together with the intermediary and work together with that platform that there will always be that give and take. So that's a long-winded way of saying you must proactively work together, but be careful who you're working with. Excuse me. So if we look at each respective third-party marketplace or social media outlet, there are policies available. There are forms available for what I will refer to as the big marketplaces, the big social media outlets. which will provide you with the legal right to enforce. And there are vendors available to your brand that can help, en masse submit takedowns, not only monitor and detect the infringement, but also provide submissions to these platforms to remove the infringement in large quantities. I think it's important to point out that there's no one-stop available shop. There's many different vendors available. There's many different platforms where you may have to prioritize. I think from a rights owner's perspective, the role in working together, or I should say the platform's role in working with the rights owner, to me, is to try and prevent the continued recidivist infringer. The low-hanging fruit, the counterfeiters or the dupe sellers that will stop is easy. It's what do we do about the ones that continue to pop up all the time? And when you're in a popular brand that's being infringed, unfortunately, creating a program and starting a program does not mean there's a solution and an end to the infringement. If the brand remains popular, there will be a continuation every month and probably an increase every month of the volume that's being sold on these marketplaces and being advertised on social media. That's a tough sell. As counsel that's involved in this and as vendors that are assisting with this, it is really difficult to wrap your head around the fact that it is a continuing, ongoing effort. So to me, the role that the platforms play, and if there's a wish list for platforms, it's do better, right? Do more. The platforms are the ones that have the relationships with these sellers. And it's not enough to just turn a blind eye and say, well, we're a third-party marketplace and we're not listing the goods, but it's the seller that you have to deal with. No, I don't accept that statement. As a lawyer representing rights owners, I believe that the third-party intermediaries are obligated to do more. And there are cases in the US, cases in other countries around the world where courts have come out to support rights owners. The challenge is what the rights owners do is they review, what the platforms do is they review that case, they look at the case law, they create a defense to a potential lawsuit, they create a potential solution, a form or an expansion of their policies, and they look at it from the perspective of, great, now we can't get sued and we won't be infringing because we're doing enough to help support the enforcement of intellectual property rights. I don't accept that. The lawyer in me says no, the platforms have to do better and do more, and there is such a high volume of garbage being sold on platforms, and I won't mention any third-party marketplaces by name because this is being recorded, but to me, the platforms that come out and promote the volume of takedowns on their actual platform, and we take down X number a year, and we have X number of employees and X number of dollars that we are contributing towards the intellectual property rights owner world and the removal of this content. I say back to them, how much garbage is still there? Don't tell me how much you're doing that many because there's so many available. So I don't look at that as a benefit to the platform. I think quite the opposite. It's because the volume is so high of infringement. So the bias in me, which is inherent, but more importantly, the rights owner perspective in me says, these platforms must look at this from the perspective of the rights owner better and more effectively. And I see lots of chatter, which I'm trying not to read as I'm looking at the camera.
But there's a very it's a comment and a question, and I will begin with you, and then I will move to Alastair. So the effective way to prevent dupe in social media could be to mediate the content of platforms.
Correct.
What do you think? Yeah.
Correct. These platforms, right? There's no regulation, or I should say there's little regulation on these platforms, and there's so much danger associated with them that, for example, if the platform is going to allow the content to be uploaded immediately, right? Think about what is social media. It's speed of impressions and interactions with other users, and it's the ability to be out there first. That's great if it's, for example, there's a benefit to society where the providing real information, not fake news, but providing real information to the most number of people, that's a phenomenal benefit that social media, for example, plays in today's society. But if it's about selling goods, or think about it from third-party marketplace, if it's about selling goods and if it's about consumer protection, why would your model be focused on immediacy and getting it done quickly? Why wouldn't it be more focused on getting it done right? On having a mechanism in place that only the real goods get to be sold. And if we move back into the physical market world, before e-commerce even existed, the onus was on the retailer to ensure that the goods that they would sell to the public were real. They had to sign a contract with the brand to get real goods before they could sell it or risk real legal liability. Unfortunately, right? So that's why consumers, for example, for counterfeits would go to marketplaces and go to flea markets. That's why traditionally that's where the counterfeits were being sold, because there were less checks and balances in those marketplaces. Why should e-commerce platforms function like flea markets? To me, it's crazy. And if consumers knew when they were in a third-party marketplace that they were buying from some guy in a dark alleyway in a cash transaction, they would never buy it. But they don't know. And that, to me, is the crazy part. So yes, regulation and proper procedures in place are needed by these third-party marketplaces and social media platforms. And it's why you'll never see me work for any of them, because they hate what I have to say, right? I'm never gonna support the way their business model works, because it's so damaging to brands.
Okay, so Alastair, how do you think brands can protect their trademarks rights against dupes in this digital space without facing public backlash or potential cancel culture consequences? And then, so considering that the proliferation of dupes can weaken their distinctiveness, while aggressive enforcement on the other side may also harm their reputation.
Yeah, it's a really great question.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, yeah, putting back on my kind of brand owner hat in many ways, I think in many ways, I mean, if the brand, you need to kind of protect your brand. Ultimately, like, how much do you want to give away? And I think as soon as you start giving it away, especially with the rights that you have, I think you're going down into a very kind of murky territory. So I think there will always, and that's the thing, we live in an age where anyone can type anything they want online, and usually it's hard to kind of get that genie back in the bottle in many ways. But I think if you're doing it in the right way and you're telling the right story about why you're protecting your rights, I think that's going to be key. So I think that's one of the key things to think about. Yeah, and I mean, many brands are aggressive in terms of the way they approach, because they need to be, because otherwise they just will unravel. And then, yeah, again, we go back to the exclusivity side of things. It's so hard to capture that again back. And there have been brands over time who have maybe taken their eye off the ball in terms of IP protection. And I think that's why it's important to always kind of come back to that fundamental point, is like, what do I have? Why do I want to protect it? And then go forward and do that with purpose, because I think that's the most important thing if you want to build and continue your brand in the real world.
So I think we have like 7 minutes, Patricia. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I will. There's another question which I think it's interesting, because I think the audience really wants to hear your opinions. So I will that both of you answer that. So the question is whether you guys consider it a legitimate or at least acceptable argument by the dupe sellers that they are actually promoting and fostering consumer interest for the original product rather than harming it. I think we know the answer, but yeah, let's hear you.
Okay, I'm going to take this, Alastair, if you don't mind. Shocking. I want to step in. So two schools of thought here. Number one, absolutely not. Any interest that is desired by the brand is not for a copycat. That is the brands that are registering and protecting their rights and are regularly not only communicating with marketplaces but involved in actions in court. They don't want that attention. They never asked for it and they don't want it. But what I wanted to do is tell you a quick story, because I mentioned that Virgil Abloh is my favorite designer, and he's a designer, and he has his own brand. It was called Off-White, which is still around today. But there's a quote from Virgil Abloh that the counterfeits never bothered him. And when that quote came out, it bothered me to my core. And it bothered my core because you had a designer that was creating and innovating, and why would he come out not in support of counterfeiters, but in indifference to counterfeiting when it could destroy his brand? There are brands out there that don't exist today because counterfeiters ended up taking over the business and eliminating those jobs. So that is what speaks to me, right? So when it comes to a dupe seller that, you know, for example, would provide promotion to that brand, it's the opposite. To me, the dupe seller is taking sales away from the brand and is devaluing the brand by creating a lower quality alternative that not only is it lower quality, that unfortunately consumers may believe is somehow associated or affiliated with the brand. And just to segue really quickly, what some brands are doing now is they're creating their own lower quality alternative. So they're competing with themselves to try and eliminate those sales to the dupe sellers. So the quick answer to that question is absolutely not. The brands want attention for the goods that they're selling, and they don't want any attention associated with anything else. And again, that's just my opinion, not speaking on behalf of any of my clients.
Okay, there's another question about brands which are engaging themselves into collabs. So aren't the brands blurring the line themselves by engaging to collabs that can dilute their exclusivity by associating them with others? What do you guys think? Alastair?
Alastair, you want to take that, or you want to take it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can just jump in
Yeah.
quickly. I mean, having kind of been through this as well, I think done in the right way, collaborations can be great. I think they offer consumers from two different perspectives, from two different avenues, maybe, to come together and really collaborate. And I think that always comes down to kind of what has the brand done in kind of building that community and building the respect between it. And it's got to make sense from the branding point of view. You don't give away your rights to something that you're never going to get back again. I think that's where it needs to be kind of clear. I mean, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I think in terms of creating excitement, it can definitely work in that way. But I think, yeah, like I say, you don't want to just give away everything you have for the sake of one collaboration. But David, what do you think?
So I'm going to put my sneaker hat on again and tell a quick story. So the Christian Dior collaboration with Nike, there was a pair, I should say 2,000 pairs of highs and lows of the Jordan 1 silhouette. It was called the Air Dior. You can go Google it. And to me, it did not dilute exclusivity. To me, it increased exclusivity. There were so few items being sold, and that was a phenomenally successful collaboration where the counterfeits were found in the marketplace even before the legitimate was available for sale. True story. And so to me, collaborations are the present and the future, and what brands are doing is they're trying to increase the consumers that are interested in that brand. And there's brands out there that all they do is collaborate, right? So there's a brand where it's just, you know, designed to work with other brands. And I would say that this is the current culture and the world that we live in. And from a consumer perspective, it's great because you learn about designers and artists that you wouldn't otherwise be exposed to. But as it relates to what that does to the brand and blurring the line, no way. I say that it, if used effectively, is a tool to absolutely benefit the popularity of that brand and not diminish exclusivity, sometimes even increase exclusivity. And so more consumers want it, less are available to buy it. If anyone has a real pair of the Air Diors, let me know. I'm dying to get them. I tried tooth and nail to buy those. Impossible.
And especially if you like the two brands. There's a collab, a recent collab between Loewe and On. And I think that's going great. I mean, and if you like the two brands and mix a little bit of a luxury thing and the sportive side, it's great. Yeah, the thing is that's too expensive, but it's, yeah.
Correct. And I will say, when it comes to the luxury brands, and I'm not going to mention any specifically, but I heard rumors from some of the luxury brands that the typical consumer for a high-end luxury brand who would never be caught dead in a pair of sneakers, it may bother that consumer, but from the world at large, and obviously I'm biased as a sneakerhead, but from the world at large, to be exposed to high-end luxury that you would otherwise not even necessarily have heard of. It is a phenomenal tool available to the brand, and if done right, I think can do amazing things.
Yeah. So guys, final thoughts. I mean, Alastair, what would you like to say to the audience? Maybe telling a little bit about your role with INTA. I think it's, yeah. So whatever you want, and then we finish with David.
Well, first of all, don't buy now. I was going to say don't buy counterfeits. No, I think one of the things, I mean, what we're trying to do at INTA is really educate young consumers in terms of counterfeits and IP, and that's why we have the Unreal campaign. You can check us out on Instagram and as well. And basically, we're going into schools and we're educating students around intellectual property, the dangers of counterfeit goods. And I think that's also something that brands can get involved in as well. We do have like a number of brands that kind of back the Unreal campaign, which is great. And I think that's it. It's kind of, this whole story is around engaging with consumers, and depending whichever story that is. And I think counterfeits and IP, they're all wrapped up in that kind of question. So that's what I'd say is the way we look at this is just, we got to keep the consumer in mind. We've got to think about what they want and the way we approach them and the way we kind of tell the story of branding and IP as well. So I'll leave it there. Over to David.
Yeah, that was perfect, and I will not even try to articulate that in a more effective way. I will put in my chat my email address. I love talking about dupes. I love talking about IP law. Feel free to reach out to me anytime if you have any follow-up questions. This is, you know, we really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak and provide our perspective on these issues. So thank you for having us, and I hope everyone has a great day.
So I thank you guys for being here. It was a pleasure. It was an honor. And I really hope to meet you in San Diego for drinks and to chat and to go ahead and talk about dupes. So thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thanks, everyone.
Rafaela, David.
Okay.